Hi, my name is Mary Lauren, and today I'm going to show you how letters were written and tell you about how letters were written about 200 years ago in the 1800s. Today, technology is very different than it was 200 years ago. If you wanted to talk to one of your friends or your grandparents or your favorite cousin that lived a long way away, you could just use your parents' phone to text them or call them or even FaceTime them and see them face to face. But 200 years ago, if you wanted to talk to one of your friends or a family member that lived far away, you had to write letters. And even today, you can still write letters. You might get a letter in the mail on your birthday from your aunts or your uncles or your grandparents, and your family might get Christmas cards around Christmas time from some of your friends and families. But 200 years ago, letters were used for all sorts of things. If you wanted to invite family members over for a party, or if you wanted to tell your family members about news, then you would have to tell them in a letter. Even presidents and war generals used letters to communicate with important people. Historians might use letters from war generals during the wars to see how different battles played out during the Revolutionary and Civil Wars. We can even look at presidents' old letters to see how they communicated with different governors and other political leaders. The videos that we make today, or the pictures that we take, or even the messages that we send will be how people will look at our lives in 200 years. But letters are important because that's how we have to look at people and how they lived 200 years ago. Today, if you were going to write a letter, you would normally grab a card and some pencils or a pen or even markers to write. And then after you wrote your card, you would place it in an envelope, and then you would put a stamp on it and write the address on the front. And then after that, you would place it in the mailbox for the mailman to take to the post office, and then be sent to the person that you're sending the letter to. But 200 years ago, it wasn't that simple. We had to use old paper like this that was made out of linen, which is how shirts like this are made out of. And then to write on the paper, we had to use ink and quill pens. And then after that, we didn't have envelopes, and so we had to fold in the paper and seal it with this wax. Today, if you were going to write a letter, you might use a pen or a marker to write with, but 200 years ago, we did not have pens. Instead, we had to use ink and quill pens. Quill pens are made from actual feathers from real birds. The most popular were turkey and goose feathers. To turn it into a quill pen, you could either let the feathers set out in the sun for a year and dry out, or you could speed up the process by letting the feather soak in water overnight, then heating up a jar of sand in the stove or oven. And after the sand was hot enough, you could set the feather into the sand and let the sand cool. And after that, you would clean the sand out of the inside of the feather and then cut a tip. And then the feather would turn into a quill pen that could be used for writing. To make the ink, you could crush oak galls, which you can find outside in your yard if you have oak trees, and mix it with copperas, a green powder, and gum arabic, which can be found in the chewing gum of today. But if you didn't want to make your ink, you could buy ink powder and mix it with solutions. That's what I did. This ink was a black powder that I mixed with water. Back then, we did not have all the colorful pens, markers, or crayons that we have today. Instead, the only colors we had were black and blue. But to write with a quill pen, all you had to do was dip your quill pen into the ink and get it off the side, and then you'd be ready to write. Today, if you're going to write a letter, you might grab a card, or you might get a piece of copy paper or construction paper to start writing. And all of these pieces of paper are made out of trees. But paper 200 years ago was called laid paper. It's this right here. and it was actually made with linen, which is what shirts like these are made out of. You might even have a towel or some clothes at home that are made out of linen. And so people would actually recycle their old clothes to be turned into paper. And so if you had some old, like an old shirt and it had a hole in it and you weren't going to wear it anymore, you would sell it to the rag man, who would then take it to the paper mill, who would turn it into paper. At the paper mill, the shirts or any other clothes would be stripped into small pieces and then mixed with liquids and form a pulp. And so once the pulp was made, it would be laid in a series of chains left to dry to be cut. And here there are little lines across the paper, and you can see those because that is how the chains left little watermarks on the papers. And once the papers were dried, they were cut into big sheets. And paper was really expensive since it was made from clothing instead of trees, and so people would buy bigger sheets of paper and cut them to the lengths that they needed, so they wouldn't be wasting any paper, because you couldn't buy the paper in bulk. To write the letter, you would need your pen and your ink and your paper. Today, I'm going to be writing a letter to my sister, because her birthday is this month. And so you would need to dip your quill pen into the ink, and you would need to get the ink off of the back of it, and where the point is where you're going to start writing. And you would start by saying dear, and then whoever you're writing the letter to. If you're writing a letter, you would need to make sure that you're only writing on the front of the piece of paper, because people didn't have envelopes back then. Instead, we would use the back of the paper and we would fold it up and put the paper like that so that the paper would serve as its own envelope. Since people did not have envelopes 200 years ago, instead they had to fold their letters and use the back of their paper as their envelope. To start out, you would have to make sure that your ink is completely dry. Once that, you would fold each side on the longer side in about 1 inch of the way. Just like this. Or you could open it up just like that and do the same thing on the other side. So then it would look like this. And once you did that, you would take and fold from the bottom and go a little less than 1/3 of the way up. And it would look like this. And then right here where this was, you would fold one more time. And so you would have a little spot at the top. And so you would fold this over just like this, but since this can easily be opened before your letter gets to the right person, you would need to use the folded pieces right here, and inside of this little flap, you would put it in there on both sides. Once you have the flaps in, you need to make sure that everything looks crisp and that it all looks better. And see, this cannot be opened up as easily, but of course it can still be opened. And so people would put wax seals right over here, because of course there's no sticky part like an envelope might have, so the letters would not be opened until they got to the right person. So to use that, you would use these wax sticks like this. Red was the most popular color, and it was used for, especially for formal letters, like the president would use red, or in the army they would use red. You could also use blue if you were sending them to family or friends, and black was only used whenever there was bad news was in the letter. And so, to start out with, you need to make sure that you have a parent with you because you do not want to burn yourself. But you need to have a lit candle, and you need to have your wax seal stamp. And it would just look just like this, and this is a desk seal. And you would use this end right here. After the hot wax, you would press into it. There were also signet rings, which you could wear on your finger, that would have your family's crest on it. And so, to begin, you would start heating up the wax, but make sure that you have to be very careful, and you have to keep spinning it around so that you don't catch them on fire, or so it doesn't start melting too fast and going into your candle. But you don't want to burn yourself or get it on your finger. Once it's melted enough, you would put it right on that flap, and you would move it around in a circle. And then you would get your stamp and place it right on top. You would hold it down for just a few moments so it could cool. Then you would lift it up, and you would have a wax seal just like this. Once you have the wax stamp on there, you need to make sure it's not melted anymore, and then you would write the address right here. Back then, people did not have mailboxes, and so you would just put the person's name and where they lived. After your wax seal is dry, you need to make sure that you address your envelope. And back then they did not have mailboxes, so you would just write the name of the person you're sending a letter to and what part of the country they live in. And once that was dried, you could either place your letter in the mail bag of the mailman, or you could take it to the post office. And once it got there, it would either be sent by train or by boat if it was going long distance, or it could just go on the stagecoach or through the Pony Express, which was how they delivered mail by horse. And even though the stagecoach might have been a little easier, it was very dangerous because some Indians or robbers might attack the mailman, and they might kill them and rob them. And once the letter got to the recipient, they would since there was no stamp, they would have to pay the price of the mail delivery. And the prices would vary based on the distance or how long, and then how difficult the journey was. And so, today I encourage you to write a letter to someone. It could be a birthday card, or it could be just a letter to your grandparents or your friends telling them about something that happened today. And if you're going to write a letter like in the 1800s, don't forget that you're going to need some paper, and then you will need your ink, your quill pen. You will need your parents' help with this, but you will need a wax stick, and then you will need your wax seal and a lit candle. And if you want any more information, you can contact the Union County Heritage Museum, or you can watch the Townsend videos on YouTube.